Thank you so much for having Anthony Magnabosco on, and thank you for the talk you've been showing. I hope Eric's having a great time over there in Vegas. But my question is, I'll give a little intro and then I'll lead to my question. Lately, I'm afraid of both strong theists, and I would say maybe, and I consider myself a liberal, but strong liberals, stronger than me, many of whom are atheists, strong theists seem to want to write their religion into law, and then strong atheists seem to want to write my intent into whatever is done. So I've seen a lot of people throw around the phrase, intent doesn't matter. And a lot of people get hit by that. Like, I don't know, like, Jamie, I really like your content. I've watched you a lot on the Non Sequitur show and stuff like that. But I know you might make a joke relating to your sexuality or things like that. And it might, maybe be like I would call an insider joke, like you're kind of just picking fun at yourself and things like that. But if we take it to the extreme where intent doesn't matter, anything you say with any sort of word could be taken as offensive. And I'm very fearful of these people who bring the intent doesn't matter philosophy in. And I really wanted to hear your guys' thoughts, and maybe you guys throw this back and forth against me.
Just to clarify, one, I kind of always have a problem with following through on applying sort of broadly worded adages and axioms around as if they apply everywhere, because that's not really how words work effectively. But do you mean in relation to when someone says something and whether or not a specific word or phrase is offensive?
Sure. Well, let's say you say something, you make a joke, which you just meant to be funny, and I know there's extremes we can take this to, but I think I've listened to both you and Eric a lot, and you might make a joke about yourselves or about others or someone who's in your situation, who's maybe lived your life, and your intent is to kind of pick fun at yourself, like self-deprecating humor. And if I were like, no, that really offended me, does your intent matter at all? Because I really fear, I fear removing people's speech, which I often see happening, and I think there's this big...
Yeah. Matter in what way, though?
Yeah, what I was going to say is the word matter, about whether things matter, is something that I jump on all the time because I think it's used too broadly. For example, when people say, oh, but without this, life doesn't matter, because it does, it's composed of atoms. But also, the way that people use that is often just a reflection of what they care about and like. You were enjoying that pun a lot. I'm happy.
I did catch it, but I don't know if I'd say I enjoyed it. That's okay.
Like the flu. But what I would say is, I have also, with a personal friend of mine, run across this, and I think whether or not you intended to offend someone doesn't change how they feel. So in that regards, oh, but I didn't mean to offend you, can be looked at as, oh, but I didn't mean to hit your hand with a hammer. It still hurt. But it does matter if you're trying to evaluate, oh, is this a person that cares, right? So for example, if I were to make a joke about people that are, I don't know, bald or something, if I intended to offend, I don't know, do we know any bald people? No.
There's a couple.
Yeah, if I had intended to honestly offend Anthony just then, we would be in a different situation than the actual situation that just occurred, which was me attempting to make a joke, even though I think Anthony probably didn't like that joke.
So do you think maybe Anthony should look at, or at least in my mind, in an ideal world, people should think about your intent? Like if you make a joke about, like, I don't know, I've watched a bunch of your content, you'll make a sexuality joke, like Mr. Atheist will make a sexuality joke about himself, like his most recent video, and it's kind of about himself. And do you think people should look at the intent, like should that weigh into people saying, or people shouldn't consider your intent at all when figuring out how they perceive it?
How they perceive your statement or how they perceive you?
Your statement, I think.
Let's go with your statement first. Let's just go with the statement. When they perceive your statement, should your intent matter?
So I think I've run ramshot over you at least twice. So
no, that's okay. I mean, I think if I were in a situation where somebody were to tease me for being bald or something, there may have been a time where I would be offended by that. But these days, there's not that much that people can say that offends me. it takes, I don't know what somebody could say that might offend me. Whether their
Challenge
intent
accepted.
before the end of the show. So, even if they were intending to say it to hurt me, I don't think that it would matter. It wouldn't matter to me. It really wouldn't. I'd be curious. I would honestly be curious why they would feel the need to try to say something that they would think that would offend me or hurt me.
Well, let's go to the other side of that. If Matt Dillahunty was sitting beside you and he just happened to make a ball joke for no particular reason, would you maybe laugh with him and realize his intent and be like, oh, he's not? What would you think about that if Matt Dillahunty made one?
I would probably laugh at it. But even if somebody did it with a malicious intent, I really don't think that I would get offended. I'd be more curious why they were doing it. What is it, why do you feel the need to try to say something that you think would actually insult me or trigger me, and maybe for lack of a better word? So I would honestly find it curious and want to investigate what's bringing it on. Like maybe I parked in their parking space, and maybe there's some other cause. So I think it would inspire me to try to figure out, well, what did I do, or what are they perceiving that I did that might cause them to want to say something to hurt me? But so I guess maybe in a way, like,
yeah,
well, I was gonna say maybe the intent is somewhat interesting, but I wouldn't paint them with a broad brush to say they're doing it. I don't know.
I wouldn't paint any statement about bald people with a broad brush, even if that would make painting someone who's bald easier, because there's a lot more surface area.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, again,
that's offensive.
Yeah, painters have much more important things to do. No, it was terrible, even by my standards. But what I would say is, it kind of comes back to matters for what. So I think a lot of this comes up when people are talking about, well, there's the broader discourse, and if you continue to include X, Y, or Z in the discourse, whether you intend for it to be humorous and whether you intend for it not to negatively influence society, that doesn't always mean that your intent affects the actual outcome. Obviously, I don't know what specific example or examples that you've actually experienced you would bring up.
Well, I'll throw one last thing at you guys that maybe this can be the last, and I really appreciate your time with this, and thank you for what you do. But let's take, for example, like, I make cupcakes for friends, and my intent is to give my friends something really nice, something really good, but for some reason, let's just say there's an issue with the flour, that there's food poisoning, and I food poisoning all my friends. And it's not due to any fault of my own, any negligence. It's some sort of food recall that we find out about a week later that no one could have seen coming. It's just, a food poisoning issue that the whole country's dealing with. So the consequence of me making cupcakes for my friends, the intended consequence, was to be nice to my friends, to show them gratitude, to further our friendship. But the consequence is, they're laid up for a week, they're in pain, and one had to go to the hospital. So I saw one person in the chat say, intent doesn't matter, consequences matter. That's what really matters. And I think the consequences, like, when you judge a person, I don't think I should be judged for the consequences of that, because if we go by judging me for the consequences, I'm a horrible person for making those cupcakes. But if we go by the intent of the cupcakes, I'm actually a nice person who was the victim of consequences. These people are suffering because of me. But I think intent is really what should be judged in that instance. And that's where I go to, the intent really matters. Like, I think that's my prime example right there, where I think intent matters.
I mean, one that I'm a little taken aback, because that's a perfect example, is there's one thing to consider the intent and another. So if they're judging you, again, you intended to do something nice. Depending on whether or not it was a food recall or your cooking, they could certainly judge your skill or lack thereof as far as cupcake baking. But the actual fact is they were sick, and so that is also something that matters. So, for example, if you took a risk with your cooking where you knew that it was possible for them to be barf cupcakes or whatever, that risk, even with the intent, would have to be weighed, even if they were judging you and your judgment as far as decision making goes. It's a very sort of interesting philosophical question, and I think it would make a perfect post on the Talk Heathen Reddit, which you can find at reddit.com/r/talkheathen. Are you willing to follow up with the
time?
Yeah. Can the viewers, fans, Redditors, hosts, co-hosts, guests bump into you on Reddit about this? Because it's great, but I don't think...
I hop around discussion boards. I'm usually on like the Great Debate community. So
Sorry, which community?
The GDC, the Great Debate community. Shout out to them.
Okay.
Shout out to them.
Cool. Thank you for your time.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for calling in, Adam. Yeah, it's sort of one of those things where it's like piecing out. It almost kind of comes down to example. Specific examples,
the whole sort of intent thing, like I was saying, even if somebody had a malicious intent to harm me, he kind of made a little bit of a switch there, and going from like a verbal situation where somebody says something about your appearance, and then he switched it to there's some sort of physical outcome. You know, I think that kind of changes it just a bit.
Yeah, it makes what the outcome is more clear, because what the outcome is of bringing this up in dialogue is a lot more difficult, nigh impossible to determine, right? Like figuring out, oh, okay, so even if you have like a platform and it's not just a conversation with you and 4 friends, what it means to drive conversation to cupcakes rather than, I don't know, hate crimes or whatever. Well, okay, that one's actually pretty clear cut. But cupcakes rather than, for example, I don't know, candle manufacturing is interesting because it's sort of, you can talk about how, oh, it shifts focus, and I think that cupcakes are more important, but a conversation about candles, et cetera. But the actual effect of that individual person having that conversation isn't something I think can be reliably measured in an empirical way.
I'm not sure. I don't really have much more to add to it.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's probably more things that can be pulled out of it, but anyway.